problem solving, I think, aligns the science as practiced in school much more closely with science as practiced in universities and industrial research and commercial research contexts. And there's a lot of research already done on inquiry-based approaches to education and how effective that can be. And I will happily circulate these slides, so I know you can't possibly write down that, but when I give you the slides, you'll be able to use that link. It's a recent summary of the research in inquiry-based learning, which was funded by the EU, and it informed a project which I also mentioned earlier, which we've been carrying out at Kew across 11 countries in Europe and 17 botanic gardens, using this inquiry-based method to shift people's thinking in the way they teach science. So the inquiry-based approach is particularly effective with gifted students. And if you think about all the, practically every speaker we've heard so far has talked about this need to give talented kids space to actually unlock their talent, to give them something to really get their intellectual teeth into, not to continually feed them content. Not that content isn't important, but an inquiry-based approach gives kids the freedom to think. And when Jonathan Osborne's research with others at King's was really interesting, looking at why high achievers dropped science. And a very common thread is that they found it uninteresting because school science was about learning a set of facts and reproducing them in an exam. It wasn't intellectually stimulating. And you have to ask, how have we managed to create a situation where a subject as intrinsically intellectual as the practice of science has been reduced to something which is turning off bright people because it's become rote learning? There's clearly a serious problem here. So what can we do about it? Inquiry-based approaches to learning are challenging to manage in the classroom, even for gifted teachers, especially when you have large groups of kids. They take time, because if you're having a genuine inquiry, you must give kids enough time. A single lesson, a single hour is not enough. You have to carry on activity over a period of time. The groups do need careful supervision and support. They will, if it's a genuine open-ended inquiry, they will follow things which will ultimately become dead ends, and it's really important that they do. The professor's comment, they must be given space to get things wrong so that they can learn from that and then go back and maybe find a more credible answer. You have to be very careful about talking about getting things right in a scientific inquiry context. But it is resource intensive and it's messy, because ideally there is a practical element to it. And you can see why, if you have groups of more than 50, beginning with physical, open-ended experimental inquiry is very, very challenging for teachers. But there are alternatives, and this is where the technology can come in. There are a number of features of computer-based environments which help support an inquiry-led approach to learning and help to support and to some extent scaffold groups of learners as they pursue their questions and test their ideas and their thinking in a computer-based environment. And these are some of them. And the shared workspace is a really important one. But they all depend on the prevailing learning culture. So the tools I'm about to talk about, there is no guarantee that if you introduce these into the classroom, you will automatically get an inquiry-based approach. You have to be committed to the idea of the inquiry-based approach and then use these tools to help you facilitate that. So understanding and representing problems is an important part of beginning to learn good problem-solving techniques. And some of the simulations can be really quite simple. So this one, for example, if you're running this, it runs an animation of a car moving on a road, and you're invited to use the sections to put together a speed-time graph. And so you can think about what's going on, you can think about how that gets represented, how that gets turned into a graphical representation, and it's a nice little trial and error learning environment. You get feedback as you go. The failure to understand graphing as a form of communication is a major problem, a major failure of science education. I could talk about it for hours, but you'll be pleased to know I won't. But these kinds of tools can really help kids to make the link between this very powerful tool for representation and the developing their understanding of the real life situations that are represented. This is another little one. This is about you can play around with the variables that affect the growth rate of your sunflower. So you can carry out some genuine investigations in the context of the simulation. So these computer simulations don't have to be that complicated for you to begin to take the first steps as a teacher in introducing inquiry-led approaches into your teaching. As you have to create a path for the teacher to go down rather than expect them. I think if you're going to look at a serious change in the teaching course as a whole, you can't expect them all to jump off the top board of the swimming pool. And I just want to say a little word about particular project, Unbox 21, which in fact was a joint UK-Indian project funded by the British Council. There's a lot of information on the website about it, and it was specifically aimed looking at using games-based environments to help teachers move to an inquiry-based approach to teaching. And it was very successful, and one of the reasons it was very successful is there was a very clear framework explaining what an inquiry-led approach should look like and how you would know that that's what you were using rather than a traditional context. And this particular piece of it's a game, it's a commercial game. It's actually, the early stages of it are available free online, which also helped to make it available. And essentially you have a series of science-based problems, and you have this little character, this little robot down the bottom, and he is travelling through a world meeting all kinds of problems. They have scientifically based solutions which you can try out, and in the Indian classrooms they actually worked with whole classes with a projection of the software and negotiated the discussion. Really quite difficult to do, but they were remarkably successful. More so with the boys than with the girls in the mixed classes, I have to say. The girls were less, and there's some really interesting situations where it was a girl who was asked to actually operate the mouse whilst receiving instructions from the rest of the class. So
Professor Angela, we have one more minute.
Yeah, this is my last slide. So I'm not saying it's easy, but these kinds of environments are powerful tools if used well. And I would urge you to go and have a look at the Unbox 21 project and the project reports that are there. And there was a good evaluation also. Kumbin, I don't think, is here, but she would be pleased to know there was an evaluation of the project as well. And it just gives you a flavour of what can be achieved with relatively low resource levels, but a real commitment to change in your approach to teaching.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I think we just about have time for 2 questions. So there's one over there.
In your talk, it just sounded like that your definition of being gifted has to do with your interest in science. Is there a basis of that? Is that an aptitude test, or is that synonymous, that one will be gifted if they are interested in science?
No. But I mean, I think it's quite interesting actually. For the last day and a half now, we've all it's the elephant in the room. What do we mean by gifted?
Yes.
And I'm actually talking in this context about 2 things which are not necessarily identical. One is an ability to solve problems and to deal with new information and to use information that you have in a novel context. Those are useful skills within a scientific context, but actually they are skills that are very useful in many, many contexts, not just in a scientific one. So in this particular instance, I think people who are good at this, who are good at deductive reasoning, who are good at generating evidence-based arguments, tend to make good scientists, but actually those skills are useful beyond science. But I think that is a particular talent set which we are desperately in need of, and we don't give children enough opportunities to develop that talent set in school.
A child, please identify yourself.
Could you?
A child is determined whether she or he is gifted, at least in the United States, I mean New York City I'm talking about, is by doing an intelligent quotient initially.
Yeah.
At the age of 3, 4, like that, sometimes to go to a special school. So I don't think that being intelligent is synonymous with being interested in mathematics or being interested in science. It would be a great writer or be a romantic person or do something.
I wasn't saying that. I was talking very specifically about a STEM context.
Okay, we have one last question there.
Angela, thanks for a wonderful talk. Now active learning and emphasis on collaborative work, these are almost becoming givens as that they deliver. At the tertiary level, education research-based strategies have worked in the US. When you look at workshop physics or studios and comprehensive learning environments, or MIT's technology-enhanced active learning environments, at the school level, in early enough, and in Europe, are there similar examples?
Not really, to be honest. Outside, and I believe it is because that's not the kind of learning that kids are ultimately given credit for in high-stakes assessment. So it's not the mainstream. You get little bits of it, but it's not the main. It's not a core purpose of science education. And one of the reasons why there's been the diversification that Brian talked about in his talk yesterday, and the need to move to specialist environments, particularly for developing those kinds of practical, problem-solving oriented skill sets. The worry is that starting at 14 may be a bit too late. But that very discovery-led approach to primary education has been politically unfashionable for some time in the UK now. And of course, it's difficult to do well. And if it's not done well, it does turn into kids kind of just playing around and not learning very much. So you do need teachers who have the right skills and the right understanding of how to manage an open-ended learning context. And this is where using the digital environments can help. Not exclusively. I strongly believe that it's really important that kids still have the real-world physical experiences of inquiry-based learning. But the digital stuff is useful as well. And it's a good sandbox for teachers, I think. Jim G's book on what video games can teach us about learning is a really useful text, and he actually has identified 36 different ways in which you can use games to support recognised forms of learning.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm afraid we're just about running out of time. Thank you very much, Angela,
Thank you
for that. Please give her a hand. Well, so in this session, we basically heard 4 speakers, and to me, there were a couple of themes which run through them, including